Yeah, I know. I actually was considering not coming because this is the only thing I'm doing here for, and there's one thing on the agenda. And then I just leave and I go back.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Built Heritage Subcommittee. In terms of regrets, we have a few from already a small committee. So the Vice Chair is not in town, and he sent his regrets. Councillor McKenney sent her regrets. And Councillor Wilkinson, I haven't heard from, but given that she's not here, I'm going to assume that she's also sent her regrets. But fortunately, we have quorum, and so that's a good thing. And there are no declarations of interest that I've received. Can we confirm the minutes of 8th February? Great. So we have two items on our agenda today. One is the National Capital Commission has generously offered to just provide an information item, which is a little bit of a survey of some of the work they've done on their pavilion initiative, which was part of their Beyond Canada 150 legacy project last year. So we're going to hear from Heather Thompson from the NCC on that. So we'll hold that item. And the second item is an application to alter the former Grant School, 2720 Richmond Road, a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The predecessor to this committee approved a heritage permit, I believe it was back in 2012. This is a renewal of that permit with a few changes, including a gym that's being built at the back of the property. We don't have any speakers registered. Staff are prepared to present. Sorry? Oh, we do have a speaker registered. So for that reason, we will hold the item. It's the proponent. Oh, it's the proponent. Okay. Can I see who is it? Sebastian Racine. Sir, if we are prepared to approve this application, would you be okay to not speak on it? Okay. So are there any questions to staff on it? Yeah?
I just had a question.
Okay. So we'll hold that item too then. Okay? Well, actually, why don't we, if with your agreement, we'll switch and we'll do this first and just get it out of the way. So if staff can come up. I think the application is pretty straightforward, so maybe we'll go straight to the question from Member Smallwood. So.
Thanks very much. I support the project, and I think it's wonderful to see this moving forward. I just had a question. Looking at the original elevations of the building and the beautiful front elevation, the previously beautiful front elevation with the arched windows, and I just wondered if there'd been any discussion, given that they are going to be replacing the 1950 windows, if there was any thought of, and the new ones, they say, will echo the character of the 1922. I just wondered if there's any thought in echoing it, whether or not you would reinstate, or the proponent would consider reinstating the original arched windows, which were such a beautiful feature of the original building.
Mr. Chair, this has not been subject of discussion. We only talked about the echoing, and the applicant is here, so it's possible that they could speak to that, if you wish.
Okay, Monsieur Racine, we will invite you up after all. Good morning and welcome. Maybe if it's okay with you, we'll just jump right into an exchange. So I don't know if you heard the question. If
yes.
So, go ahead.
Yes, it was discussed many years ago when the project started. It's a load-bearing masonry walls for the building. The alteration were made many years ago, and to replace the existing windows right now, to be able to go and make the modification to the existing structure by trying to wear the new masonry that we would be adding right now would be extremely difficult technically, and this would bring up the cost of the project extremely.
Okay, so you did look into it, and it was ruled out for those reasons?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Monsieur Racine, is there anything else that you'd like to say? Because now that you're here, you're certainly welcome to make any other comments that you wish to on this application. You don't have to. No? You're fine?
We're fine, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming.
Yep.
So we do have now a second speaker who's registered, David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa. Okay. No, I think, Member Smallwood, any more questions from your side? Okay, no, thank you very much, though, and thank you for your offer to speak. So if there are no other questions, is this item carried? Carried. Okay, thank you. Okay, so with that, we'll go back to our information item, which is a presentation from the National Capital Commission, and I'd invite Heather Thompson to come up and join us. Good morning and welcome. Yeah.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Heather Thompson. I manage the Heritage Program at the National Capital Commission, and it's mostly familiar faces around the table. But thanks very much. I was asked to come and speak today about the NCC's legacy projects from 2017 and beyond. So a brief overview of my presentation. I just wanted to touch a little bit on the role of the NCC as it relates to conservation. And not just to talk about some of the building projects, we'll definitely talk about those, but I also wanted to just speak about our multifaceted role and the legacy projects that relate to each of those in capital planning, federal approvals, capital stewardship, which is many of the buildings we're going to speak about. Also our work in Algonquin and Anishinaabe engagement, and then just to conclude at the end. So as manager of the Heritage Program, I have the privilege of working with basically every branch of our organization in the long-range planning and the federal approvals. And so I think there's an opportunity. I'd like to share some of what we've been working on the past year and what we're now working on going forward. So the NCC's mandate, as you know, under the National Capital Act, is to prepare plans for and assist in the development, conservation, and improvement of the National Capital Region in order that the character of the seat of government of Canada may be in accordance with its national significance. And as you know, we've been about 118 years in the works on this project, with the establishment of the Ottawa Improvement Commission in 1899, at that time the mandate was really focused on beautification, but now our mandate over time has expanded to include conservation specifically. Just a brief touching on, in terms of our long-range planning role, we've developed, many people often think about the Great Bear Plan, but we're building on a legacy of many, many plans over time. And in terms of legacy projects, those plans are critical to what becomes a legacy. So sometimes the works that are put into place in accordance with those plans end up being heritage worthy of conservation in the future. And I guess just to touch on that, I'm sure many of you around the table know one of the first major projects of the Ottawa Improvement Commission, which is the transformation of the Rideau Canal by the creation of the Rideau Canal driveway. And so here's the Rideau Canal in the 19th century, and basically the Ottawa Improvement Commission and the NCC subsequently transformed the shores of the Rideau Canal from this is the 1920s to the 1970s to what we see today. And this is the works that we're undertaking on an ongoing basis, whether or not they're specifically heritage projects or heritage buildings, become heritage in the future, we hope. It's all legacy work. This is, of course, and as you know, Doug Fullerton, our chair in 1971, also launched the Skateway. So all of this work on the Rideau Canal, which of course now we celebrate as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So in terms of, I guess building on this point about our long-range plans, so the main plan we launched last year, of course, was the Plan for Canada's Capital, which is this 50-year visionary plan with 17 milestone projects that will be developed over that period. Those milestones projects were developed with widespread consultation, crowdsourcing, and conservation is a pillar of this plan in every way, shape, and form. So this is certainly a legacy project from last year, which will continue to set our priorities going forward. Another important plan that was approved and launched last year was the Capital Illumination Plan, which will help to highlight many of our heritage assets in the capital. And so that's also a landmark plan which will help to, over time, transform the capital and highlight, as I say, the heritage assets. Plans we have now in the works, which are building on those plans, are the Sir John A. Macdonald Riverfront Park Plan, which has had consultation and is continuing to be developed and should be refined this year. The North Shore, the plan for the North Shore, the Gatineau Park Master Plan. So this year we are full on with more long-range plans, which will help to shape not only sort of the vision, but also the conservation priorities for each of these areas. So just moving on to our federal approvals role, this is a role that is not always well highlighted in the public realm, but it's a really critical role where we have an opportunity to shape projects, especially conservation projects. So as you know, where the city manages plans and projects in the private realm in terms of the private property owners submitting their plans and projects to the municipality, the federal departments and agencies submit their plans and projects to the NCC for approval. So we are the approval authority for federal land in the capital. And conservation is a really critical piece of that. So every year we have about 250 federal approvals that are coming through our office, ranging from the LRT to a tenant signage. So it's a wide range of things. But last year we had some very important projects, and just to highlight two of them, one of them was the National Arts Centre redevelopment, revitalization, and also the conversion of the former Union Station to the Senate. And those are beautiful projects which are really legacy projects in terms of their impact on the capital and on conservation. And we're very proud to have worked with the city, for example, on the NAC project, where we brought around the table a special heritage advisory committee that included the city, included Heritage Ottawa, to inform that site, because it's a National Historic Site, and we wanted to make sure we had a very rigorous process. Of course, with the Senate conversion, we had the Federal Heritage Buildings Review Office, and so the NCC plays an important role in that committee as well. So going forward, one of the most highest priority, and this is priority milestone number one in the Plan for Canada's Capital, is the parliamentary precinct. And so coming forward, the federal approvals in terms of the NCC's priorities, one of the highest priorities will be the rehabilitation of Centre Block, East Block, the developments along Wellington in the parliamentary precinct. So that's going to be a very important priority for the NCC going forward. So getting to our stewardship role, obviously we are the largest federal landholder in the capital. We actually hold 11% of the total geography of the region through the lands in the urban core, the official residences, the Greenbelt, and the Gatineau Park. And through that, we're stewards of such a wide variety of heritage buildings, in particular from the official residences to barns in the Greenbelt to commercial buildings in the market. As well as cultural landscapes, the capital parks, the parkways, the recreational pathways, a rich repository of archaeological resources on our lands, and of course, the management of the Rideau Canal in partnership with Parks Canada. So one of the things this year, or prior to 2017, our CEO challenged our staff to look at some of the most underused buildings in our portfolio and try to bring them to life for 2017. And so there was, we'll say 10, but there were actually multiple. Many of you may have seen the passport that was produced. You can go and visit quite a few of them, but there were multiple projects, and I'm going to touch on some of them in this presentation, but there's some that were actually pavilions and some that are also projects that are still legacy projects that are related, but not specifically pavilions. So these are a few of the highlights. The Dairy Building at Rideau Hall, 7 Clarence, which was the International Pavilion, the Moore Farm, the 150 Middle Street on Victoria Island, the Global Centre for Pluralism, and 50 Sussex, the Royal Canadian Geographic Society that has taken that over. But as I say, so these are some, and I'll touch on some of these through the presentation briefly, but I also just want to emphasize that, again, just getting back to our sort of legacy work, as many of you know, the Mile of History was a very important project in the 1960s and 1970s in terms of transforming Sussex Drive from basically what, I guess, in the 50s, it had basically become fairly dilapidated, transforming that into basically, acquiring a lot of the properties along Sussex, restoring them, and bringing a dignity back to that area. And so now, we're, in terms of that legacy work, we're now continuing that because we now have to go back and do, some of the work on those buildings. So as you know, this year we are working very hard on the Tin House Courtyard and the buildings along Sussex there, but also we had the priority for 2017 of the new building at 7 Clarence, which of course we had worked closely with the city and with the public to develop that design in such a way that it would fit within the Byward Market context and the Sussex Courtyards context. At Rideau Hall, this is an area that so I'll touch on the pavilion, but also about, I think, in terms of Rideau Hall, there's been some really important work that was done for 2017 that go beyond strictly the pavilion. And one highlight I wanted to highlight in particular was the Forecourt. This is a picture from an aerial photo from the 70s. This is an aerial photo from before the works we were doing, and you can see it's the asphalt drive and the Terry Fox fountain. This had a lot of technical challenges in terms of access and for our ceremonial events and so forth. I won't get into it, but I can certainly speak to it more if you have questions. But there was a need to transform that forecourt and also to do damp proofing on the building. So we took an opportunity to really study this and to do a really careful job to incorporate. You can see here, this is when some of these projects that you'll see, you look at the finished product, you don't realize all the things that go into it. But we transformed the forecourt with the necessary underground infrastructure in order to actually deal with universal accessibility and all of the communications and security issues that need to be addressed at a site like this for dignitaries. So in the end, we have a beautiful result, and I hope you have a chance to go to Rideau Hall and visit and see. But you can see that we've retained the heritage character of the site, but we've transformed it in such a way that it is meeting our current needs and the needs of the Governor General. So at Rideau Hall, the other really beautiful project was the dairy building. This is a little building, if you may not have ever noticed it at Rideau Hall because it was in the operations area. It's a remnant from when Rideau Hall was a self-functioning estate with a farmyard, and this was the building where the dairying operations took place, and it was built in 1895. As you know, the skating rink at Rideau Hall has a long-standing history since 1872 of having public skating, but the shack that was used for the skate changing was very dilapidated, and there was a need to replace it. So the idea was to take, inspired by some historic photos that we had found of the site, where you see the dairy building in the background, the idea is perhaps we could relocate the dairy building to the skating rink and actually help to give it a new public life. And so that is what has happened, and I hope you have an opportunity, if you haven't already, to go to skate at Rideau Hall with this pavilion. It is really beautiful, and you can still do it because we refrigerated the skating rink, so it will still be open until the end of March. So if you haven't already gone, it is a lovely experience, and the building itself it was meticulously restored as best we could to conserve as much of the original material. This is the ceiling. I mean, it's a really beautiful project, so this is one we're very proud of. In terms of other pavilions, the log farm, as many of you know, so I just want to touch a bit on the Greenbelt. The log farm had been years ago in a living history museum. It had fallen into disuse over many years. It's now been brought back to life as an active farm, but also is being interpreted for special events. And so last year there was some great public access to the site where there was interpretation and so forth. So this is a really good news story on Cedar View Road. Also, just in the Greenbelt in general, we've been being very proactive to try to develop a sustainable agriculture strategy that not only looks at the farmland, but also the buildings, including the barns. So we are trying to actively now rehabilitate many of the old barns, and we've had approval by the board to invest in those structures. And then finally, In the Gatineau Park, we have a couple of big projects going on. We're working with the Strutt Foundation on the conservation of the Strutt House and the O'Brien House, which has been long vacant, is now going to come back to life this year. So this as a hotel, and it's a really exciting project in collaboration with the owner of the Wakefield Mill Inn. And so there's going to be a really exciting project there, and it is developing very well. Just to touch at the end, before I conclude, just to touch a little bit on some of the work we are doing with the Algonquin and Anishinaabe communities. So we had done some work to rehabilitate these buildings at 150 Middle Street on Victoria Island, the former Bronson Company office and its associated warehouse. And we were very pleased to have the opportunity this year to work with Pikwakanagan, the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan and Kitigan-Zibi First Nation, to interpret this site as a pavilion for this year. So it became the Kibeshan Minitig Pavilion. And there was an opportunity to showcase Algonquin culture, history, art, archaeology. So it ended up being a really exciting place, and really I think there was a lot of learning that took place in that site this year. And of course, the long-term vision for Victoria Island is a partnership with the Algonquin communities to create a cultural space there. And so there is now the next step for this work is to continue to develop a plan in collaboration with the Algonquin communities for Victoria Island. At the same time also, my colleague Ian Badgley, who many of you know, has been doing active public archaeology on many of the NCC lands and lands in NCC stewardship, and in partnership with the Algonquin. So as an example, this is at Lamy Lake Park, where there are thousands of years of archaeology to be discovered, and it's been a real learning opportunity for many members of the public, as well as for ourselves at the NCC, learning with the Algonquin communities on that site, as well as at the Moore Farm, and also at Penny's Point, as well in collaboration with the city. So just also, in terms of legacy, I mean, this is a bit of going a little beyond, but just the idea that we have, this past year, we had a couple of exciting events in our urbanism lab related to heritage. So we had Heritage in the spring as a driver of sustainability, where we had Jean Caroon, Brenda Ojic from Kitigan-Zibi, and Mark Brandt all talk about sustainability and heritage. And of course, leading into the APT National Trust Conference, we had Heritage circa 1967, which was an exciting look at what was happening in 1967 in the capital and beyond, and what that means for conservation. So I hope you also, there's many exciting events coming up this year, and the Capital Urbanism Lab is really something that has been very well received by the public and will continue, we hope, to be a legacy into the future as well. So look for the next one in March, which is Canadian design as cultural export. So with that, I just want to conclude to say that I know I was asked to speak about legacy projects, but in a sense, the NCC's very mandate is legacy. It's about the hope that the work that we're doing now in many ways, shapes, and forms will actually be worthy of conservation in the future. So we're hoping. So that's I'd like to conclude with that, and thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak today.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting, and I know there are lots of questions, so I'll start with Councillor Moffat.
Thank you very much. I know you touched on a lot of things. The Rideau Hall stuff is interesting. When I used to read gas meters for Enbridge, one of my jobs was running around the yard at Rideau Hall, reading all the various gas meters in different buildings.
Wow,
so I got a chance to see it from a different perspective. But I know that in the federal budget there was some announcement about funds that would go towards building, hopefully building renewal. Just curious, from a built heritage perspective, what does that mean for the NCC? And also something you didn't touch on in your presentation at all was 24 Sussex. What's the plan for 24 Sussex? Thanks.
Great. Well, it was certainly good news to receive some funds. As you may know, I mean, our asset base, as I was alluding to in the presentation, is tremendous. It's been assessed at $1.7 billion. And generally, we receive $22.7 million a year to operate that portfolio, which is challenging. So this money is great news. Obviously, there's now a question of where that money will be spent and what the priorities are. But the NCC has been well positioned to try to identify what some of the more urgent projects, and there are many heritage projects in our portfolio that will receive attention through that funding. So I can't speak to what those are yet. It's still being decided, and the priorities are being set. But and then as for 24, I mean, we've been studying the site, and we're well positioned, but we have to wait to sort of determine what the government's priority is for that site at this point. So no news on 24, but certainly as I say, I think that we'll see a lot more projects coming down as a result of this new funding.
Heather, I was going to ask a similar question about the money in the budget. Was it $55 million? And so just to be clear, so the answer is it's not yet public to which buildings or which parts of your asset base that money is going to go towards. Is that correct? So that's still to be determined?
The priorities are being set because we have, as you can imagine, we have a lot of work that could be done and needs to be done on many different assets. So, we have to just figure out where the priorities are. But certainly there are many heritage buildings that are candidates for investment, for that investment. So, we have many designated federal heritage buildings, but also some of our other assets, like many of the barns in the Greenbelt, for example. We have already decided to invest in those and make sure that those are well conserved. And most of those don't have any formal heritage status, but they obviously are important heritage buildings in our portfolio.
Another question that I was going to pose was, wearing my ward councillor hat, I was obviously very, very excited about the plans announced last year for 50 Sussex. And we're going to see the Royal Geographic Society, the Canadian Royal Geographic Society, moving in there this spring. Are there other ideas, or is that a first phase of a multi-phase process for that site, or is the expectation that once that group is on site, you're sort of done with that for the time being?
I have to admit, I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that question. As I know it's for sure a first phase, but I don't know the next phases, because I'm a little less involved in that project, given that it's a little bit less of a heritage-focused project. So maybe I'll have to defer. I can find out the answer for you, but I don't know if I can speak too much to what the next stages are.
I do have one final question. Did you have a question too? Okay. Member Smallwood does, but there is another pavilion that you didn't mention that I'm also very excited about, which is the Ottawa New Edinburgh Club. And that was one of am I right that was one of the 2017 pavilion sites, and that is on the larger list of assets that could potentially be subject to some development by the NCC?
I can't preempt any announcements on that one, so I'll just say it's on the list. It's on the list, but there'll be more to come on that one for sure.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
These are not specifically heritage questions, but because they're part of the presentation, I'll take the liberty to ask them. Part of your presentation, actually, Scott had asked the questions I had, the heritage questions. So, the part of your presentation was about the capital illumination plan, and I love lighting, and I think it looks great. But my concern is just from a light pollution standpoint, and I noticed that some of the pictures that you illustrate have uplighting, which I think is the worst kind of lighting in terms of light pollution. So I wondered if you could mention something about how you're making sure that this plan won't increase light pollution in the city.
Absolutely. Well, the very basis of that plan is, better lighting, not more lighting. So in fact, your point, and that's interesting about the photo, that if it had uplighting, because we are also not in favor of uplighting. So this is something we're trying to reduce. And so for dark sky, and for all of the reasons that you'd be concerned about, we're definitely, that's in the plan, front and center, that it's not about more lighting, it's about better lighting and thinking about how we create a nighttime atmosphere that is more attractive and better, but at the same time respecting night's dark sky and time and wildlife and so forth. So one thing that's been interesting, so for many of the projects that have come forward, it's been an interesting discussion actually with the Federal Heritage Buildings Review Office as well, because they're also interested in that, and also in minimizing impacts to the buildings by adding too many things. So there's always a discussion that takes place between what kind of lighting is appropriate so that it's not fixing too many things to the buildings, but also not projecting too much in an upward direction. So this is always a little bit of a fine-tuning, but that's definitely front and center in the plan, that that's the goal. Now, one of the areas we've had at the NCC that's been a big discussion has been actually our lamp standards around the capital, the globes, because in fact they're a heritage element in many ways in the capital, but they also are kind of not the best practice in terms of where we're trying to go with lighting. But that's one where, luckily with technology now, there's opportunities to retrofit, so that you can still have perhaps downward light. So we're exploring opportunities and what that might mean for some of the historic lighting infrastructure even. But you're right, absolutely.
Okay, the other question was just about you talked about the parliamentary precinct and you were talking about the other properties along, and I just wondered, is it part of the NCC plan to continue the multi-use path along the Ottawa River behind the National Gallery?
Behind the where?
National Gallery.
Oh, this idea of the Rideau to Rideau trail? That is in the plan, in the plan for Canada's capital. So the hope is to continue that, but that will be a multi-stage process for sure, but that is the hope, yeah.
Thank you. My apologies for being late. I got caught behind an accident. And I scrolled through all the pictures, and I just say I love to see the heritage ones there. Some of them I remember when I was a child, because I went out of Union Station when all the things were there when we were at best. And also thank you for the Urbanism Lab. I've been to a number of the sessions there. I'm a geographer by training, so those things really grab me. And the other thing is, been so involved in Canada where we tried to create a community that fit in with nature. And that's really one of the things I wanted to sort of raise to you is, we do a city built with nature incorporated into it. Sometimes the Greenbelt acts as a barrier to what we need for our urbanism in the community. And I think it's working a little better now than it used to. But I think there needs to be an understanding that although you have a very special mandate, the mandate doesn't mean that the city is ignored, because the city's needs are an integral part of the whole thing. But we do have to keep the nature focus, which you've done quite well. But sometimes overwhelmingly over the urban needs, which creates different issues for us as a city. So it's just something to raise in. I've looked at your new plan, and it does things like, I wanted to do a dog park. And it's possible to do it in the NCC lands and some of the leased lands, but you put in your plan, you want to have no more dog parks anywhere in the Greenbelt, even on leased land, which means I have to get other things to change that, because Councillor Taylor and I were kind of working together on this, and I've talked to Wesley Clover. They can't have one there under this policy. So it's a little bit overly restrictive sometimes. You could have said we discourage them rather than saying fat ban. The city does that sometimes too, by the way. It's not just yourself. But it's a case of having black and white somewhere. You need some grays around the place. But I do love the way you're protecting some of the heritage buildings in the community. That's really important to have that sense of where we were before we look at where we're going ahead. And anything I can do to support that, I will. And the pathway system, I'd like it to be open in the winter too, but that's the only issue. But it is used by a lot of people, both for going to and from work, which is surprising, it's a long way, but also in recreation. And I think the recreation part is a part you've always been excellent at. And I'd like to see you get you involved maybe with some things I'm doing with the Conservation Authority. We're working on developing a wetland park where people can learn about the wetlands. I already have an arboretum that has, the kids go and find the numbers, they check with the sign to see what the trees are and things. And these are things I think that there's a lot, not just in my area, but other parts of the city, where there's a lot of partnerships that we can do that would stretch your money a bit more, stretch our money a little bit more, but end up doing things for the community. So thank you for your mandate. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you, and I think you're speaking actually directly to the Sir John Mcdonald Parkway plan. I think it's that's the direction for sure in that plan, to try to connect people to the river and to teach about conservation and sustainability and what that means. And it's been a wonderful partnership with the community there around the winter recreation, where there's been the ski trail that's been groomed and so forth. And so there's I think there are some great opportunities and some good momentum going on some of those things.
The NCC has never done anything outside the Greenbelt. And that's, I think, there's some things there that you could be involved in when the city has protected some of the land, fortunately, but there are some things where we could partner and moving things a little bit, not just Greenbelt and in, because we have absolutely nothing outside the Greenbelt. And I didn't even see that very much in the plan. You talk a little bit about some things, but I don't see any action things there. It is something to look at for the next 50 years.
Okay, ideas for 2067. Although you already have a lot of good ones there. Member Quinn.
Thank you very much. It was a very, very good talk, and great to see those images, things coming along. I sit on the Doors Open Ottawa Advisory Council, and I'm really happy to tell you that the Canadian Geographic Society are on board for Doors Open this year. Yeah, so great. I bet there'll be a lineup for that one. Yeah. Yes. My question comes back to Sandy's about capital illumination plan. And I have a question, because we're going to have a very important project for the City of Ottawa come before us in the spring. And right now, the proponent is presenting, this is about the extension or the addition to the Chateau Laurier Hotel. And when I was at the open house last week, I heard a lot of questions about illumination. And you know what it's like when you have something that's very bright, it tends to put everything around it in darkness. And we are talking about a UNESCO World Heritage Site. We have the Parliamentary Precinct. Right now, the lighting from the rear, you know, the Parliamentary Library, the beautiful Gothic Revival buildings. And I'm just wondering if the NCC have a role to play in that. I know this is private property, but it's a National Historic Site, and it speaks to Major Hills Park. There's Major's Hill Park, rather. So I was just wondering if there's a role for the NCC in that regard.
In the Chateau Laurier project?
Well, yeah, and I'm thinking of, generally speaking, but I suppose my question is about lighting.
Right.
But you can weigh in.
Well, no, absolutely. Certainly with the lighting, on the lighting side, I mean, the plan is very focused on the idea that the lighting should focus on the national symbols, you know, and so that at the end, it shouldn't, as you said, that there shouldn't be your eye should be drawn toward some of the icons, you know, the iconic sites. So that's certainly clear in the plan. And then in terms of the Chateau Laurier, I mean, obviously the city has the main approval authority for that file. That being said, we do, the proponent has been working with us following our federal approval process, but we're sort of, you know, the city is really the lead on that, but we are working closely with the city because we want to be on the same page as where that's going. But because basically we will have an approval in the sense that if the project goes ahead, it is crossing federal land.
I was just wondering if the illumination issue had come into play at all with your discussions, and if it hasn't, maybe it should become a part of it.
Yes, it certainly is an issue that has been raised. Yeah.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I see no other questions, so Heather, many thanks for coming out this morning. That was really useful, and I think really important for the city and the NCC to be working together on these things, and I know that the cooperation among staff is very, very good, and it's great for us to get a briefing on the exciting projects you're doing, so thank you for coming out.
Thank you for the invitation, and I brought copies of the brochure of the PFCC if anyone would like copies.
Great, thank you. Yeah, just you feel free to leave them there and we can grab them.
Great.
Okay, so is that item received? Yes, received. Excellent, thank you. So that brings us to the end of the substantive agenda. Any notices of motion or inquiries or other business? If not, then we are adjourned, and our next meeting is Thursday, April 12th. So thank you, and we'll see you then.